Rocket. I put my 2 weeks in, and they gave me about 48 hours. And so, yeah, we're full-time on Constance right now.
What would you say is one thing that you've learned while you were there?
One thing I learned,
Yeah.
um,
Or what's one takeaway from your experience?
there's a lot of takeaways. Like I said, I was there for almost a decade. Like, it's...
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about like scheduling and stuff.
Scheduling, yeah, because, when we're on our
Well,
own
that's
schedules.
actually what we should. That's what we should talk about first.
Okay.
Is welcome.
Yes, the arena's here.
Talk about that, man. How was that? First, like what happened, and then, how you're feeling.
Yeah, so for anyone who's watching this who doesn't have any context, if you want more context, I uploaded a video on my channel talking about this, and we'll link that below.
Did you upload it already?
It'll be up by the time they see this.
Okay.
But basically, yeah, I've been working at Rocket for almost 10 years and decided that I needed to step away.
Said I'm out that bitch.
Yeah, I needed to really flex my wings and actually figure out what is, what's real out here. It's been 8 years, I think almost 9 years of developing kind of, I don't want to say like in a sandbox, because it is like, it's still the real world, but there's definitely like a different level of responsibility you have jumping into like the arena of an entrepreneur and the things that you're responsible for. And, we've been working on this stuff for quite a while, and it was just got to a point where it just didn't make sense to continue spending the mental effort of supporting an enterprise level system when we have all of this stuff going on. And
yeah,
it's honestly just way more exciting to be doing this with people that I like working with. And, it's just, it's actually going to be easier on me going forward than having to kind of spin all these different plates. So yeah, I ended up leaving Rocket. I put my 2 weeks in, and they gave me about 48 hours. And so, yeah, we're full-time on Constance right now.
What would you say is one thing that you've learned while you were there?
One thing I learned.
Yeah.
Or
what's one takeaway from your experience?
There's a lot of takeaways. Like I said, I was there for almost a decade. Like, there's a lot. I guess, are you looking for something that I've learned, particularly in tech, in life? Is there anything
that comes to mind? And I know that you're going to cover more of this on your like own channel, so I think that
yeah,
it doesn't have to be like the number one thing, but just the takeaway where you're like, okay, I spent that time there, and I know that it was was it your first one after you graduated?
No, it was the second job I had after I graduated. But like the first, I guess I should say, like the second, like Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
That was like a really big enterprise. One thing I've learned, I guess, this is something that we've talked about all the time here, but I think Rocket does like a really good job of it, especially lately, is telling a good story about the products that they sell.
Yeah.
I think they do a really, really good job of highlighting the client journey, the client success stories, and like the client story around, getting them into a house, getting them into the American dream as they see it.
You see that? The Texas license plate. Straight. So many people moving to Detroit from Texas and California.
That's true.
And I just see these license plates all the time. I'm like, what in your mind?
Why?
But I guess like there's opportunity up here, and I don't know, but that's another conversation. But I do think that, yeah, Rocket does a really good job of, because they have to. I mean,
I think that's something that not a lot of people realize, right? If you're not in the industry and you're not taking like a serious look at what mortgages are, you don't realize that everyone's the same. It's kind of backed by the government, and there's not a whole lot of novelty when it comes to the actual mortgage product.
Yeah.
The novelty comes into how you deliver that product and how you delight your actual customers.
Yeah, and that it's something that's so interesting, and I think we've actually found a lot of frustration in that, reaching out, whether talking with different tech people, where they're like, what makes your product different? because we're in a space where it's not actually just the product that's different. It's
Yeah.
like how it's delivered, how it's packaged, the experience around it, when a lot of tech companies only focus on like the innovative nature around
Yeah.
it, which I guess you can draw some innovations around the like the actual how you create an experience around that. But it seems like everybody's looking for, is this the next Chat GPT?
Yeah.
When they're asking about differentiation and innovation, when
That's
again
true.
we're in a space where you optimize and you deliver really cool, you deliver like a good experience, but it's really about like how you're differentiating from a commodity. And even people there are like, that work there are like, no, this isn't, it's not anything that, like, we're not selling anything different.
Yeah.
It's like the things around the experience that we make things simpler, we make things easier and more straightforward, we make things like we make it easier for you to get into your home.
We make it easier for you to make decisions in confidence.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because like there also is like an abstraction here where like everything that we do is a story.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so like we don't want to pull that away from anyone who's like, you know, thinking about this at like the most atomic level. Is like, yeah, like everything we do is a story.
Yeah.
But the way that they're actually executing that particular like problem of like how do we convey that to a client,
Yeah.
I think is done super well. So I like that's probably one of the things I've learned. And there's a whole lot of other things that I've learned in terms of like specifically what I was doing was like on a dev team, right? Like leading software development. And so a lot of the learnings I've had come from that, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, how do you actually motivate a developer to come in and do the best effort? How do you make sure that what they're doing is, you know, actually to spec of what we were asking? And then how does that process work in terms of getting the developers time to work and then time to actually learn why they're working on what they're working on? So a lot of learnings in that department, but I think all of that stuff is kind of hidden in the shadow of like, what's the story that we're going to tell each and every day?
Yeah, that's an interesting takeaway. Like learning how to develop product in an enterprise environment, a company environment. It's not always as straightforward as you would think.
That's
and
true.
There's so many different things that can go wrong. Personalities that can either accelerate or slow down the process.
A lot of politics.
A lot of politics, but that's just like people, right? Like
It's just people.
And so when you factor that in, it's like, okay, there is a lot to take away and grow from. What do you think what are any areas that you just think you've grown outside of just like specific realizations? Like, do you notice a change in your demeanor and your behavior after going through that tenure at Rocket?
I mean, of course, right? Like anybody who works, or even anyone you give them 10 years, they're going to change.
Yeah.
And so like I can very clearly remember myself being very bright-eyed and eager to jump in and, you know, help as much as I possibly could. And then over time you start realizing that in that particular space, and this isn't true for every corporate environment, but in that particular space, a lot of people are just focused on what they control, not really what they control, but what they're responsible for. Like that's all they're concerned about. They're not looking at the bigger picture. And it's actually something that I developed. It's like, okay, let's look at the big picture. Let's look at why these things are happening, and not just, I got a ticket, let me write the code, let me write the unit test, and let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So going into those things, like I kind of expected it to be a very clean working environment. And what I mean by that is like almost like a school environment where they're like, here's the box, we've kind of solved all the externalities, just do the core.
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of grade you on that.
Yeah.
But like something that we learned really early on and that I kind of took to heart was like, there's a better way to do the thing, and just give me the problem that you're that you're trying to solve, and I'll come up with a better solution that has nothing to do with like the code or the system that you're asking me to work on, but will be a net benefit for the company. A really good example of this is like how the mortgage industry has like chat on all their websites, and really normally it's just like a form where you can just kind of put in, you know, the top, you know, whatever, you know, most of the time for a mortgage company it's going to be like, what state are you in, what's your first name, last name, and email. What we saw when we looked at that data was like everybody was autofilling their state with Arizona because it's just the first one in the drop down, which would mess up all of our pipelines. And so when you actually look at the problem and say, okay, how can we do that in a better way? Introducing something like a virtual assistant, which is able to actually ask the question and get a conversation going, improve those metrics just out of the gate, and that kind of cascaded down the entire pipeline. That's not something that you would necessarily get to know or even be in those rooms of the discussions happening in any of these big corporate environments.
Yeah.
Right? It's taken away from the developer. It's given to like the product manager or like the product team sometimes, and it's just not communicated to the people who are on the ground solving the problem.
We had a really unique experience in that we got to build a team from the ground up around an emerging technology
And a product. Team and a product around it. And it just gives you so much access to how it should work.
Yeah.
Versus how it does work, unfortunately, in a lot of these bigger teams.
Yeah. Like, especially around that, well, got this little Chick-fil-A coming out.
We'll see.
I guess we can kind of talk around it while we're waiting. But I think But the thing that I'm thinking about is that is not the average experience, and I think we got to see so much and peek behind a lot of the actual things that drive development because we were creating something new. It wasn't like we were just kind of fit onto a team. It started that way, at least for me. Like when I first got onto the team there, we both joined Galaxy, which we both worked at before Rocket, within the same week, and then we both got placed really early on teams. But we were on separate teams. You were on the Alexa stuff.
Correct.
So you were like creating some newer things. I was more on like optimizing an already existing system,
CTI.
which was like their whole like texting communication systems, and that was cool. But after I finished up the project there, I joined your team, and that's where we were like, okay, let's develop this voice assistant, and then it became let's develop like artificially or AI based chat systems.
Yeah.
And that like was really cool because we were trying to really help with the problem, and to me, like having worked on both
Twin lane to kind of work in versus doing it from the product inception. Completely different world.
Different world.
Even in the corporate space, they'll give you the autonomy to go find these answers that you'll never be given on a team where it's just like we have the senior engineers, we have the junior engineers, you're just kind of a cog in the machine.
Yeah. And so like that is something that we learned there, and I think going through it and then also being able to reflect back on it is really cool because in the moment that a lot of that shit was not like we were just in the middle of it.
That's true.
And so like reflecting back on it is a different experience, and we had war rooms, we were coming up with the products, there was a lot of fights there. It's kind of cool because seeing how some of the people have kind of gone their other ways. I don't think it's an accident that like we're not the first people to start startups after leaving that.
Right.
And so like that's also a cool thing to look back on and say, okay, like we did have like a unique situation going on there.
Yeah.
And
it was almost like an incubator inside of a Fortune 500 that they didn't realize it at the time. But looking back on it, you're like, oh wow, that kicked off a lot of people's like careers.
Yeah, it really did. And that like there was heated times there, a lot of intra-fighting and all that other stuff. But it's also cool to see how it evolved into something that's more stable now. I don't know if that's like, to me, that is not an environment that I think I particularly thrive in.
Okay.
I don't think that's necessarily for you either, because it's just like there's a lot of walls there, and I think it's a different problem.
So my take on that is the beginning stages when we were given the full autonomy is the ideal environment. That's like the ideal environment for me, where they're like, basically, we know what we want you to do, and we're going to write you a blank check to go do it.
Yeah.
And that's how it was for the first couple months. And then you started realizing that, and this happens a lot of times in the corporate space, but like the engineer builds the product and then the leader or the product owner assigns themselves to like, hey, I own this.
Yeah.
Which is fine because you do need someone to represent what you're building to more business stakeholders and stuff like that. But it becomes a problem when those people start thinking, oh, I own this, and so now I'm responsible for the direction and the vision. And they start like making those decisions without coming back to the dev team who built it. It becomes one of those just really typical enterprise software products.
Yeah.
Which doesn't have the innovation, doesn't have the autonomy that I think we thrive in.
Yeah.
And so that's when it started becoming more mainstream is where I felt a little bit, it was just more disingenuous.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's what ended up happening at the tail end of those 10 years, where I got put on a team where they just saw it as a commodity. It was a pure commodity to them. And so it was just like, we're going to do all the thinking. We're going to give you the ticket, and we expect that ticket to be done today.
Yeah.
And it was just like measured on how many tickets can you get done, because we've done all the thinking. You're doing all the doing.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it's cool, and I can do that, but eventually you get burned out into the spot where it's like, what am I actually doing? Like, what am I actually building? What am I learning? How am I growing?
Yeah.
And for me, I wasn't, and so it was time to leave.
And some people thrive in that dynamic.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
Hi, what's the name?
Jake.
It's gonna be 24, 25.
There you go.
yeah. So I don't think it's like one of those things where it's
Thank you.
you know, people shouldn't be there, but I do think that it's like a time and place thing, and it's you stay there while you're learning.
Jake. Say again?
It's one of those things where you stay there while you're learning, and then you know, you ride that out until like something else calls for you. So that's cool. It's like
it's also like really important too to keep in mind that like the only reason that I'm able to jump right and do full-time this is the pre-planning that it takes to say, oh, hey, I may not be growing here at the same rate I was. Let's plan for an exit. Let's do all these things in a way that, you know, my world's not going to come crashing down.
Thinking like a few moves ahead.
Yes.
That's so critical. And I mean, that's not something that people really highlight, but I do think it's one of those things where you know, like, you're not just making a move off of impulse. There's something that, like, there's a place to walk into and to enter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
Hi, what's the name of it?
Jake.
Jake.
You know, I'm just waiting for these rude people to stop interrupting us.
Yep. All right. So it's this. Perfect. Thank you so much.
But like continuing on that vein and continuing with like, because I do think it's cool to highlight some of these transitions in life and on the entrepreneurial journey.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because, you know, they happen once and then they become more and more clear as you go along.
And you have that space to reflect.
Yeah.
It's sometimes, and some people who are very good at this, I have a lot of respect for, but to be able to give yourself almost like that hindsight in the middle of the situation, it's a very special skill. I've only seen it done a couple of times really effectively, but when it's done, I notice it right away. I'm like, oh wow, they're already thinking about this exact moment in, let's say, a 5 or 6 year time span.
What do you mean by, like, when have you seen it?
Oh my gosh. So like one of the ways that I've actually seen this done at like one of the highest levels, and I ended up respecting the person more than I did initially. Was I was in a conversation, or I wasn't in the conversation. I guess I was in the room when the conversation was happening. Around, and this was recent, like around the effects of agents, and how the effects of agents are going to have on basically software development, right?
Okay.
And we were going down this framework of like, how do we want to architect an agentic framework for the right level of abstraction to give to any number of teams at a Fortune 500? And so really what we came up with is basically a really simple, you know, agentic framework where the architecture is that you'd have supervisor agent that would pretty much do the classification of what the person was trying to do. And then you have a bunch of worker agents, right, that kind of go through and say, okay, I was assigned this task, I know how to do this task, let me just do it and then return my stuff to the supervisor agent, who can kind of figure out, hey, this is what we should return, or hey, I need to evaluate this and then send it back to another worker agent maybe to get a better answer. So that setup was what we had achieved in an internal kind of working group at the company. And without assuming he had no context, the CTO came in and was just automatically asking questions that we knew were going to come, but we didn't expect them to come on like day one. You know, some of those questions were around like the scalability of the multi-agent framework, right? Like, at what point can you get this agent framework to scale and it still be effective? Because you're going to start losing the details of the prompts at a certain number of scale. And so, like, the CTO was just able to come in, pick up exactly where we had not left off, but apparently like essentially stopped the demo. We're like, hey, this is what we have so far.
Yeah.
And then he was able to pick it up and just go like, okay, you might want to think about doing this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Without seemingly any context to what we had actually like done. And it was spot on. Like he was able to identify ways that we could scale this thing to hundreds of thousands of teams if we needed to, or sorry, hundreds of thousands of agents if we needed to, right, to support the many teams at the company.
Okay.
So like just being able to say like, oh wow, this is really cool, but it fits into my vision for what I see us doing in 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
Like that was really cool. And then he was able to give actionable advice and say like, hey, you should look into doing this because in my 5-year plan, like that's where it fits in. And it was just like really cool to see that. And working with like agentic frameworks and like AI and LLMs, there's just not a lot of people in the world that can give you that level of clarity and vision today.
Okay.
And I think that was just one of those moments where it was just like, wow, like you're applying hindsight almost in the moment.
You're applying hindsight in the moment. That's how you describe the skill.
That's what stuck out to me as he was like, oh, that's interesting. Like he almost didn't need the data to tell him the path we were going down. And I don't know if that was because he had like prior experience or if maybe he had a private conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
Right. And then got brought into the room because sometimes that does happen.
Yeah.
It's happened to me multiple times where I've had a private conversation, brought into the room, and like that just happened to be what we were talking about. And so I seemed like an expert. But yeah, just like the way I would describe it was that it seemed like he had hindsight in the moment where he was like, oh, I could see how this plays out in my head if we do this plan. And so to future-proof a bottleneck, go ahead and implement this today and we'll see how it performs.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
It's a very similar conversation you'd have to any senior engineer, right? If you're trying to implement something you've never done for the first time. They're going to have that experience to say, hey, look into this, this, and this, because I just know that's going to be an issue for you.
Yeah, you develop an intuition of where things are going to go and how things are going to play out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is really cool if it's like, oh yeah, I've done this before. It's even more interesting if no one's ever done it before and you're already able to kind of hop on that train.
Yeah. It's like thinking beyond the immediate too.
Yeah.
That's such a skill that you can develop. And it's so cool to see it in action
Yeah.
and see how people's brains can kind of skip ahead a few pages and see, okay, well, if this is the case right now, what does that mean? What does that lead to? And how does that fit with the vision that we have right now?
To be quite honest with you, like it was one of those moments where I was like, oh wow, like this is another person at this company who has the big picture.
Yeah.
He's able to connect these dots because he's seeing the big picture of like, okay, this is happening in this world, this is happening in this world, and then they all kind of come together here.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that I had lost going through that company structure, where, you know, coming back into this entrepreneurial space, I'm so grateful to have that amount of autonomy again.
Yeah.
You know, to be like, hey, like, let's go explore why this is the case and how we can apply these things across the business and not just in this unit test, you know, or in this feature.
That stuff can it's important because that can atrophy too.
It absolutely can.
If you're not using it or flexing it, or if you're not being encouraged to use it and flex it.
Same way that, you know, we atrophy our coding skills when we use too much LLM.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion, right?
Which we'll absolutely get into. I actually have a whole white paper where they started doing studies on the atrophy of your coding skills if you use too much LLM assistance.
That's interesting for so many reasons. I think maybe one thing that we should talk about next time is like what we look at, like how we evaluate, like what we look at as a program, like what we think that job actually is. And actually, let me get out before you part.
Trapped.
Yeah, but great talk.